Neighbor from hell tries to steal our house, faces karma when her own actions get her slapped with a $200,000 bill. Hello everyone. Before we dive into this wild tale, let's introduce the main characters. The entitled neighbor will be referred to as Karen moving forward, and her spoiled son will be called entitled son, ES. There's also the previous owner of our house, who we'll call PO, though they play a limited role in this story. Keep in mind that the events span nearly 15 years from the time we bought the house to the present day. Unless stated otherwise, assume there's a significant gap between most events. Now, let's set the stage and build up to the climax. To properly understand the chaos that unfolded, I need to provide some background. Most of this drama happened before we even bought the house. Karen owned a massive chunk of property located down the road from a popular recreational lake in our area. I say down the road, but it's actually a fair distance away, even though the road Karen lives on is the only route leading to multiple lakefront properties, resorts, and the most popular boat dock on this side of the lake. The properties here aren't so expensive that normal people can't afford them, but there are some extremely valuable estates further down the road, with very wealthy people driving by all the time. This detail will be relevant later. Karen, being quite wealthy and owning a large portion of land, decided to split her property into 4 roughly equal sections when her children came of age. One section went to her daughter, who, surprisingly, is a decent person considering the rest of her family. Another section went to ES. Karen built houses on both properties, tailored to her children's specifications. On the 4th section, the one without her own house, she built a small convenience store. This will also come into play later. For reasons I'm not entirely sure of, perhaps to avoid future disputes, Karen gave the deeds to her children for their respective houses and properties. You can probably see where this is going. While the daughter was responsible, ES was the complete opposite. He was a party maniac, and everyone in the neighborhood at the time absolutely despised him. He threw loud, obnoxious late-night parties almost every single night, keeping everyone awake. The police had someone stationed nearby because they were called on him so often. It probably didn't help his entitlement that Mommy paid all his bills. Karen kept everything in her name: water, electric, garbage. All the bills went to her mailbox. Well, all except one: the property tax. Since the property was in ES's name, so was the tax bill, which he never paid. Instead, he just ignored it. I guess Karen either didn't think about it or assumed he was paying it himself. Either way, it wasn't a surprise when the police showed up at his house. What was surprising was that he never came back, and the house went up for auction. By this point, the house was in shambles. There were holes in the drywall, and the living room floor had a massive hole leading down into the garage basement. The kitchen floor and subfloor needed to be completely replaced, and almost all the walls were covered in mud. Basically, ES's irresponsibility and party habits left the house in what the banks considered an unlivable condition. Because of this, the only people who could afford it were those who could pay out of pocket. Enter PO. PO was a house flipper, not one of the big wealthy ones you see on TV, but more of a hobbyist. He was retired and flipped houses to stay busy and active. PO would buy houses like this one super cheap at auction, fix them up himself, and then put them back on the market. While he worked on a house, he'd live off the profit from the previous one. Typically, by the time he finished fixing one up and buying the next, his profit would have run out. Any leftover money went into an emergency savings fund, which he said wasn't anything special. At the time, my family and I were in the market for a new place, but couldn't afford anything super expensive on our budget. When we saw this house listed on a website, it seemed perfect. It was the right size, in a great neighborhood, and just down the road from the lake, which we loved for fishing and boating. It was perfect in almost every way, or at least it looked that way. We were nervous about the price, which wasn't listed on the website yet, but figured it wouldn't hurt to at least take a look. We drove by to check it out, and found PO working on it. We stopped to say hi and asked about the price. He explained that he was planning to fix it up and sell it, and that his realtor had just added it to the website's database to make things easier when he was ready to sell. We sat down and had a nice chat with him, just being friendly, and he appreciated the company. We explained that we'd be willing to buy it from him for a reasonable price, considering its current condition and the work he'd already put into it. The house was about halfway finished. We told him we'd love to finish it and live in it as our forever home. He turned us down, explaining that he already had several offers and didn't feel right selling it to us. He said we could buy it for the full price once he was done. We kindly thanked him, left our number, and asked him to call us if he ever changed his mind. He promised he would. Less than 2 weeks later, we received an unexpected call from P.O. He explained that his sister had fallen ill in another state and that he wanted to be with her. As a result, he wouldn't have enough time or patience to finish the house. He told us the house wasn't up to code, but said if we could find a way to buy it, he'd be happy to sell it to us for a reasonable price. We happily agreed and immediately started looking for banks. Thanks to a realtor friend, we found a bank willing to loan us the money to buy the house, with a few conditions attached. Basically, we had 2 weeks to bring the house up to code. Otherwise, they could default on the loan and auction it off. After explaining the situation to P.O., he offered to help as much as he could. He couldn't physically do any work on the house because he was in a rush, but he explained exactly what we needed to do to bring it up to code and meet the bare minimum requirements. He told us how much time, effort, and money it would take. He even offered to help us in another way. We took out a loan for twice what he actually wanted for the house, and he gave us back the other half. We used that money for repairs. After the work he'd already put in, the house was so close to meeting code that we probably could have done it ourselves. But just to be safe, we called in a few friends and got it done in half the time. Once the house was up to code, there was still plenty of work to do. Over the next several months, we replaced flooring and subflooring, rewired the electrical system, patched holes in the walls, and replaced old, ugly, literally decomposing wallpaper that was stuck directly to the drywall. You get the point. We put a ton of work into the place. Finally, it was time to move into our dream home. It still had a few issues we planned to fix down the road, but it was livable, and we were thrilled. We weren't even fully moved in yet when Karen came over to introduce herself. While we were working things out with P.O. in the limited time we had, he had warned us repeatedly about Karen and her entitled attitude. At first, Karen was extremely nice, and we couldn't understand why P.O. had warned us about her so much. Then it happened. As we were wrapping up our conversation, she explained, in a very kind and compassionate tone, that our house actually belonged to her and that we had 30 days to get out. She said she felt sorry for us because we'd been scammed so badly, but the house was rightfully hers, and P.O. had no right to sell it to us. We'd heard horror stories about people being scammed like this before, so you can imagine our terror when she laid all of this out for us. We were horrified. We'd put so much time, effort, and money into this dream home, and now we were going to lose it just like that because we'd fallen for some guy's scam. We thanked her for explaining it to us and being so nice, and we said we'd talk to the bank and P.O. to get it all figured out. That's exactly what we did. We talked to the bank, who confirmed that P.O. was the actual owner of the deed. We spoke to the realtor, who testified the same thing. We even spoke to P.O., who explained that Karen had accused him of stealing the house multiple times after he bought it at auction, and that she had harassed him constantly over it. Everyone we spoke to had the exact same story. We even went to the courthouse and confirmed that our name was on the deed. During this process, we heard the backstory about ES from several neighbors. Karen came by not long after this and asked us when she could expect us to be moved out. We explained that it would never happen because we legally owned the property, and it wasn't our fault that ES had lost it. We apologized for her loss and acknowledged how hard it must be to lose a family property due to her son's negligence. But we made it clear that we weren't going to give up a property we'd bought with our own hard-earned money and worked so hard to fix up. Realizing we knew the situation, Karen launched into a long sob story about how the property had been in her family for generations and how she couldn't bear to lose it. She claimed P.O. had stolen it from them while they were caught up in the confusion of their son's arrest. We asked why they hadn't bid for the house and bought it back after ES lost it. Considering we'd bought it from P.O. for only about $50,000, and even after all the work and materials he'd put into it, he'd still made a small profit. They could have easily bought it for next to nothing at auction and gotten it back, and explained that she felt the house and property were being stolen from them and that they refused to pay for something that rightfully belonged to them. We apologized once more, but explained that there was no way we were going to take a loss on the property, especially after all of the time, effort, and resources that we put into it, and the additional materials that we bought for it just to make her happy. However, we were sympathetic with her situation and offered to sell the house to her for a very reasonable price, $100,000, which, considering its location and how fixed up it is, was still just over half of its total market value. After buying it from PO for $50,000 and putting an additional $30,000 into materials plus several months of hard labor to fix it up, we felt that was a very reasonable price. We didn't say anything, but we would even be willing to go down to $90,000 if she wanted to negotiate with us. She immediately counteroffered with $40,000, explaining that she shouldn't have to pay anything at all for something that rightfully belongs to her. When we said that was way too low, she responded saying that she understood how much effort we put into it and that we had to buy a lot of materials to fix it up, so she would be nice and throw in an extra $10,000 for all the stuff we did to the house. When we told her that $50,000 was what we bought the house for from PO, she got upset and called us liars and thieves, saying the house was a complete dump and that there was no way it was worth that much. Not only had she resorted to name-calling at this point, but going as far as to call our dream home a dump after all the blood, sweat, and tears, not to mention dollars that we poured into it. We were done with her BS and kindly asked her to get out of our house, explaining that she was no longer welcome here and that we would never sell our house to her, even if she offered us double the market value. She obviously got upset about this and threw all kinds of insults at us as she walked out the door. Later, we found out that she was spreading all kinds of rumors about us throughout the neighborhood, saying that we stole the house from her and all kinds of other stupid stuff. At first, we ignored it, thinking that no one would actually believe it. Then a guy pulled into our driveway with a gun, threatening us to get out now. We'd never met him before, but we had heard of him. He apparently considered himself to be the peacekeeper of the neighborhood and confronted anyone who caused problems like this. Most of the people in our neighborhood actually liked him, saying he was a pretty reasonable guy, and being a very rural neighborhood where plenty of not-so-law-abiding citizens live, most people greatly appreciated his presence. He actually did work hard to keep the neighborhood as peaceful as possible and did way more than the cops actually do most of the time. Anyways, just a note, our neighborhood is split into two primary sections. One section is filled with mostly old retired people. It's very nice and peaceful. Everyone gets along. The other is filled with the less law-abiding people further into the wilderness and away from prying eyes. We live at the edge of the peaceful part, separated by about a mile or so of woodland and farmland. So hearing about him before and assuming based on descriptions that this was the same guy, we decided to test out that hypothesis. We told him that we had no idea what was going on and invited him in for a beer and chat. We allowed him to bring his gun, but told him that we would be bringing our own as well. Almost everyone in my town has a gun. There are more gun stores than there are dollar stores, if that says anything. So we weren't really worried about him having a gun with him. That doesn't really mean much in our town. It's just a way of saying, hey, I'm capable of defending myself if this gets out of hand. Now, if someone pointed it at you, which he didn't, then that would be a different story. Hello everyone. To keep this video going, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and helps us continue bringing you great stories. So if you enjoy our content, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support makes a huge difference. Alright, let's keep going. Back to the main story. He agreed, and after a few hours of chatting and explaining the situation, he admitted that he figured it was something like that, and apologized for the misunderstanding. He explained that he got caught up in the rumors, flipped a switch, and that it wouldn't happen again. He also thanked us for buying it, explaining that when S moved out, everyone was much happier. He didn't have to hear people complaining about loud music, drunk high teenagers stumbling down the middle of the road in the middle of the night, and nearly getting run over. We all had a good laugh about it afterward, and he left without saying another word. Now, time for the reason Mr. Peacekeeper believed the rumor so easily. This is a bit of a side story, but it's also a major turning point, and when everything started to go downhill for Anne. I also want to add that the events of this side story do overlap a little bit with the events of the next part of the story, but let's get on with it. So, I mentioned that, and split off 1/4 of her property to build a convenience store. Well, this store was extremely popular in the neighborhood. Being right in the middle, basically, it was in a perfect location. It wasn't popular for their prices. They actually overcharged for everything by quite a bit. And it wasn't popular for their customer service either, which included, and was mostly limited to, "Thank you for your purchase," as you walked out the door. Sometimes, though, they would give you a refund if you found mold on the food you bought from them, so that was nice, I guess. Anyways, they were so popular because they were the only convenience store for miles. If you had to buy groceries and didn't want to drive all the way to town, then they were just a skip and a hop away for most people. Heck, we even put aside our differences and shopped there on many occasions. I mean, they were literally next door to us after all. But aside from that, the popularity of their small store allowed them to build up quite the reputation in the neighborhood. A very positive one. Everyone wanted to keep their convenient little store, and they would dare anyone to try and take it from them. I suppose I could kind of see the sentiment there, and that's back when everyone thought Anne and her family were pretty good people. So, when Anne started spreading rumors, people tended to listen. The rumors about us stealing an entire house from her just blew over because everyone knew that was ridiculous. But for the most part, people still trusted her. They did believe the other rumors though, and trust me, there were plenty. But they were mostly small petty stuff that no one ever cared about. Let me just say that even assuming all the rumors about us were true, there was much more that could be said about some other people in our neighborhood. So, no one ever paid any attention to them. They did avoid us, however, considering that Anne had obvious beef with us, and no one wanted to be on her bad side in fear of being banned from her store. They all just ignored us and left us to our own devices. After a few years, however, S finally got out of prison. Having nowhere left to go, Anne allowed him to move back in. She didn't like the idea of him living with Mommy, so she rented him an apartment above her convenience store. She absolutely forbid any wild parties on her property ever again. He didn't actually have to pay rent though. All he had to do was run the store for them when they were busy with other things, which wasn't even all that often. However, even after all of this, S still did not learn his lesson. Obviously, while he was running the register, he would often double charge for items and pocket the extra money. We found this out several times and went back in for a refund. They always made up the excuse that the register was broken. After noticing a pattern, however, we brought this to the attention of Anne, letting her know that her son was double charging people for items and probably pocketing the extra. Even though Anne was pretty entitled, even she didn't go so far as to do something so obviously illegal. And we liked her little store and didn't want anything to happen to it. However, instead of thanking us for bringing this to her attention, she told us that we were imagining things and, in a very nice way, told us to screw off. So we very kindly complied with her request. We also shared the information with some of our friends in the neighborhood. It had taken years to actually get to the point where some of them would even look at us, let alone talk to us, thanks to Anne. But we had finally made some friends. Bringing Christmas treats to your neighbors every year is a good way to brighten up someone's day. But anyways, they thanked us, even though they let us know that they didn't actually believe it. However, the word did quickly spread through the neighborhood. Then, very quickly, came Mr. Peacekeeper. He pulled up in our driveway again, this time a lot friendlier. He mostly ignored the rumors about us, knowing that most of them were fake, and we'd actually talked to him several times since then. Not on any serious matters, mostly on more friendly terms. He stopped by for a beer every now and then and just chatted about happenings in the neighborhood and asked us our opinion on a few things. He did this with everyone, speaking to most people at least once a year, to stay up to date and make sure everything remained nice and calm. He didn't like the idea of police hanging around, so he made up his mind to do their job better so they wouldn't have to. Everyone, including us, really liked this arrangement. It meant you could let your kids walk down to the lake unaccompanied, even through the bad parts of the neighborhood. That being said, he absolutely did not like the rumors we were spreading about our neighbors, especially their little shop. He explained that he had already talked to them, and they felt it was just a misunderstanding due to register issues. He warned us that if we didn't want a problem, we would stop those rumors right then and there. We wanted to show him proof, but we knew he probably wouldn't believe it. He really liked Anne, and would generally take her word over ours. Since they had blown it off as a register error, there was probably nothing we could do to convince him. So, we agreed and apologized for any issues, explaining that we just felt wronged and sincerely wanted to protect the few friends we'd made in the neighborhood. He accepted that apology, gave us one final warning, and left without saying much. We listened and made up our minds to stop shopping there unless we absolutely had to. But everything changed after a couple more years, after we had pointed it out and the rumors spread around the neighborhood, even though Mr. Peacekeeper himself went around and told every single person that they were false rumors, started by us because of our property feud with N. I'll get to that a little later. People actually started paying more attention to their receipts after shopping there. They began noticing the same patterns we had. Over this time, S had probably pocketed untold amounts of money, and N definitely knew about it, but chose to do nothing, instead trying to silence people with rumors. However, the thing about small country stores like that is they are completely dependent on their regulars, the people who live in the neighborhood where they're set up. During the warmer months, when people are vacationing and having fun, they make a huge profit, but not enough to sustain themselves through the winter. And then it happened. Mr. Peacekeeper finally connected the dots, and boy, was he angry. We could hear him all the way next door, cursing out S to his face, and N right there with them. You can't even imagine how satisfying that was. But that was only the beginning. Not only did he go off on them, but he also went door to door that same day and let every single person in the neighborhood know exactly what they were doing, even taking a pile of receipts with him to show anyone who wanted proof. Now, if there was anyone in the neighborhood who was trusted more than Anne, it was Mr. Peacekeeper. Literally, in the course of 24 hours, he had completely ruined their business. Everyone in the neighborhood stopped coming. They still did pretty well over the summer months because of vacationers and winter birds who didn't know anything, but when winter hit and those crowds were gone, they started hemorrhaging money. After 2 winters, they were forced to close their store for the winter months. However, that also meant they had to throw away more than 90% of their stock every fall and buy it all again, fresh every spring. I guess doing that wasn't very economical, so they ended up permanently closing shop after 3 more years. That was when their reputation in the neighborhood started to tank, and thanks to that, people started actually respecting us more. We were able to make some friends without having to put in a ton of extra effort. People stopped ignoring us and treating us like we were plagued, but that was just the beginning of N's downfall. Unfortunately, to get to the climax of the story, I need to do a little more background work. Sorry that this is starting to turn into a small book, but this shouldn't take too long, I don't think. So, something about Anne is that she is extremely, and I mean extremely, nosy. We can't even walk outside without her watching our every step through her window, or going outside to walk her dog, pick up her lawn, pull weeds, or whatever excuse she can come up with at the time. You can pretty much guarantee that if we are walking around our property, she is outside as well. It's not like we have anything to hide, but we obviously aren't on the best terms with her and don't really like someone staring at everything we do. We have plans to set up a small pool and hot tub out back and really don't want to be watched while we're trying to relax in our bathing suits. So we started looking into a privacy fence. Wanting to be nice neighbors, we kindly informed N that we would be putting up a fence, to which she adamantly objected. We informed her that we would be putting up a privacy fence regardless, but since we still had to live with her, we offered to discuss the details of the fence, the color, shape, etc. We wanted to make sure she didn't have to stare at something she thought was an eyesore all day, every day, considering that staring toward our property seemed to be her favorite pastime. Honestly, we still go out of our way to be the best neighbors we can, even after all the crap she's put us through. But back to the story. We wanted to make sure there were no disputes about where we put the fence, so we planned to put it a foot over our property line across the entire property to avoid any issues. By the way, this was before S got out of jail. We went to the courthouse and paid for a copy of the deed along with a map of our property lines. We were honestly shocked to find that about 1/3 of our property was being claimed by N. She had a small shed on it and even a garden. You see, there's actually a line of trees that goes through our property. It's not a straight box property like you find in some states. It's more of a half hexagon or trapezoid shape. Weird property lines are pretty common where I live. Anyways, there's a line of trees that cuts through part of our property. According to the deed and property map, it's like a little triangle section, but the trees make it a square. N was claiming the other side of the trees as her own property. When we brought this up to her, she completely freaked out again, calling us liars and thieves and all kinds of other stuff. We didn't care too much about that property because we had lived here for years, thinking it actually was hers. So, to make things easier on everyone, we offered to sell it to her, or even trade for a portion of her property. There was a portion of her property that connected with ours that was extremely inconvenient to take care of, and extending it out a little would really make it easier to deal with. Not to mention, it would give us more room to do stuff we wanted to do. She flatly refused, saying that she would never pay for something that already belonged to her, and she wouldn't even think about giving us her property for nothing, especially after we already stole this property from her. Since then, there's been a huge ongoing property dispute between us. Now, something about the place I live. As I mentioned previously, it's a very rural area with many strange property lines. Property lines here are very often not cut and dry. Many deeds are hundreds of years old, and instead of saying X feet in Y direction, they use temporary landmarks like large oak tree to large rock next to stream. Many of these landmarks could be describing multiple things or could even have disappeared over 100 years ago. So, to say that there are a lot of property disputes in our area would probably be an understatement. That, along with the fact that a tiny portion of property can go for a lot of money in some situations, has led our state to create a lot of very strict laws and regulations governing property disputes, surveyors, etc. As a side note, just a few years ago, a landowner won a property dispute against a very large corporation over just 0.1 acres of land that cost the corporation and earned the man over $1 million. Hello everyone. To keep this video going, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and helps us continue bringing you great stories. So if you enjoy our content, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support makes a huge difference. Alright, let's keep going. Back on topic. All of that being said, our property lines were pretty cut and dry since she created them herself fairly recently. However, that doesn't change the fact that laws regarding it are very strict, particularly when it comes to surveyors. A surveyor might be easily bribed by a large corporation facing the loss of millions of dollars for a tiny piece of land, like in the example above, but that's not fair to the proper landowner. So, how do you balance that? You make it so the surveyor has everything to lose from lying, and so does the person who bribed or blackmailed them. The laws in our state determine that if a surveyor, even by honest mistake, gives a bad survey by even a few feet, not only can they be given a hefty fine, but they will also lose their license and never be allowed to survey again in the state. On top of that, they must notify and refund all of their clients for up to 10 years before the incident occurred. The clients then have the option to request an additional survey by a non-affiliated surveyor at the expense of the original surveyor. That's every customer up to 10 years prior to the incident, and everyone since then as well. If they were not found to be accepting a bribe or blackmail, the previous clients can also sue them for any damages caused by any changes to the property line due to their bad survey, as well as charging them appropriate rent for any property that the surveyor may have left out during that time. If a surveyor was found to be accepting a bribe or blackmail, then all damages and additional fees go toward the one who bribed or blackmailed them. Accordingly, this, along with the loss of time and money from being in courts and the general hassle caused to them, makes it so that surveyors in my area will actively avoid anything that even resembles a property dispute. So, when a dispute occurred, you can imagine that it was not as easy as making a phone call and getting a surveyor down here. It was also an unexpected expense. Unfortunately, before we could find someone, N found someone first, and I guess she bribed them or something because they gave the property line exactly how N described it. Well, except for one little part she didn't like. I guess she didn't mention that to them. Our property apparently stretches to about a foot from her house. Oh, that was fun to play around with, but that was nothing near the property that she is literally trying to steal from us now. Whenever we are able to find a surveyor, she always seems to nonchalantly introduce herself to them and mention that she already had her portion of the property surveyed, throwing in a few subtle hints that there might be a property dispute involved. This instantly scares off anyone who might be interested in surveying our property. After explaining what that could mean for them, I'm sure you understand why. Oh, did I forget to mention that the land markers from the bank surveyor when we bought the property conveniently disappeared before we actually moved in? No? Well, they did. Somehow. I wonder how that happened. Guess we'll never know. Well, anyways, at this point, it would probably cost us as much as that piece of land is worth, or maybe even more, to actually hire a surveyor if we can even find someone willing to do it. Everyone we've found so far has given us absolutely ridiculous quotes for obvious reasons. I mean, they are basically putting their entire lives on the line here. But we are currently saving up to try to hire someone, and that brings us to just a few months ago, the climax of this story. Sorry for the long backstory, but let's get to the main event now that we are fully caught up on the situation at hand. So, a few months ago, there was a very bad storm that ended up knocking down a tree on the disputed property. This tree was actually right next to the road, so when it fell, it destroyed part of our other neighbor's property, the one that lives across the street from us. That's not all. It also totaled someone's brand new sports car while they were driving down the street. Thankfully, no one was hurt during all of this, but the cleanup did take several days. Just enough time for us to receive a bill in the mail for over $200,000, literally more than our house and property were worth, even after we fixed it up. Cue malicious compliance. Just a little more backstory for anyone who might not know. Most property or home insurance policies will not cover damages to other people's property. That's typically on you. And even if someone is on public property, like a road, if your property damages theirs and you could have reasonably prevented it, for example, by cutting down a tree next to the road before it fell in a bad storm, then you are 100% responsible for the damages caused by it. Well, at least that's how it works where I live. So, when we got the bill in the mail from an unknown rich person's insurance company for their totaled sports car, we called them up and very kindly let them know that the tree that fell was not on our property. They asked us a few questions and said that they would investigate the matter and get back to us. About a week later, we received another letter from the insurance company. This time, it included a copy of the deed and a property line printout with the tree in question circled in red, showing that it was very clearly on our property. They were demanding full payment within 30 days of their first notice, or they would be taking us to court. That gave us about 2 weeks, give or take. At this point, we called them again and explained once more that it was not on our property. At first, the agent argued with us, explaining in much nicer words than I'm going to use that someone would have to be brain dead to believe that the tree in question was not on our property. They said it didn't matter how off the property line on the printout might be. It would be completely impossible for anyone to ever be stupid enough to believe it was that far off. We simply gave them the number to the surveyor that we had hired. They sighed, saying they would contact the surveyor and investigate the matter further, but reiterated that we had about 2 weeks to get the payment ready if what we were saying could not be confirmed. Well, we never heard anything back from them again. Remember the consequences I mentioned for giving false survey results. Even if the surveyor admitted to accepting a bribe, there was no way that they paid him enough to make up for all of his possible losses. He would probably have to leave the country at this point, so there was no way that he was going to give the insurance company anything different from what he gave us. We called the insurance company later to see what we could find out about the issue. The agent seemed pretty happy reading through the notes. They couldn't tell us too much due to confidentiality reasons, but they could tell us that the other party had disputed the claim, just like we did, saying the property did not belong to them. The surveyor had confirmed the results with them, and considering that we were not arguing with the survey results, and that the surveyor was hired by the other party themselves, there was no reason whatsoever for the insurance company to believe that the results were false. As long as we weren't disputing the results, then the full responsibility for all damages caused by the fallen tree should be on the other party. They couldn't say anything more than that, though. We were satisfied with that much. It was about what we expected. The aftermath? As you can probably tell from my backstory, the other party didn't have a huge problem paying the money to the insurance company, though they obviously were not happy about it. We don't know how much money they have or had saved up, but it seems like it was enough to pay it off without having to sell any more of their land. Since then, we've mostly stayed quiet about the property dispute, but we are still considering saving up to hire a surveyor to get our land back. At this point, it's more about the principle of the matter than it is about the actual land. As far as the other party goes, though, we can tell whenever she looks at us now that she is definitely not pleased with us. She does not seem to like the fact that we let her have our land for some reason. I mean, free land. How can you complain about that? LOL. At this point, she could try to spread rumors about us, but it would probably backfire. We've made friends with a very good portion of our neighborhood, and nobody trusts her anymore since they found out that she was literally stealing from everyone in the neighborhood under their noses. She knew about it and did nothing to stop it. Now, she's basically stuck between a rock and a hard place, and we're just sitting back and watching the fires she started burn her to the ground. Can't wait to see what happens next. Oh, this is just a little extra for anyone who wants some extra fun. While we were contemplating a privacy fence, we decided to put up an invisible dog fence for our dogs. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a small electrical wire that you bury under the ground. Then you attach a special collar to the dog's neck that, if they get too close, will let out a beep that the dogs really do not like. If they keep going, it will apply a very mild shock to the dogs. We don't believe in shock collars, so we had to be convinced first. One of us actually held it and walked across the line. It was something that you could feel but didn't really hurt, just left you a little tingly. Anyways, you're actually supposed to condition the dogs to the beep before you just let them loose with it, so ideally, they would never even feel the shock in the first place. They would just hear the beep and turn around. We tried to do this so that we could let our dogs roam around our yard and not be cooped up in the house all day, but at the time, we couldn't afford an actual privacy fence yet. We had it well into our property, partly because it wasn't that long, and also partly because we wanted to avoid our dogs getting anywhere close to the neighbor's property. She must have thought we were marking where we wanted to put our privacy fence or something, because she accidentally ran over it with her lawnmower, even though it was more than 5 feet past what she claimed to be the property line. We all learned that day that electrical lawnmowers do not play very well with electrified wires. Her mower was completely trashed. Every electrical component was ruined. She had to buy a whole new mower just because she wanted to be petty and run over our markers. The best part about it is that since it was so far over the property line, she had no way of trying to blame it on us. She did obviously try to spread her rumors, but they didn't go very far. It would have been so stupid to blame us that she didn't even try. She never even asked us to buy her a new mower or anything. I guess she knew how we'd respond if she did. LOL. Anyways, hope you all enjoyed the story. I have another one coming up about a different situation, how my mother's malicious compliance cost her company over $100 million and got her entire department completely and permanently shut down. But it's late, and I'm going to bed. I'll tell that story tomorrow or something. Be on the lookout for it.